Hi, Jamie. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we cannot wait to talk to you about how you bring academic talk into your classroom.
So we want to hear all about your routines, your structures, how do you get your students talking in your classroom? We want to hear all about it. So let's start like on a smaller scale. We want to hear about just what's a strategy you use like every day, something that teachers could easily just like pop into their class tomorrow. They really get students talking more.
Yeah. This is something that comes to me from the incredibly talented Becky DeSmith from Keys to Literacy, just a dear friend of mine at this point. But years ago, we were sitting in a PD and she said, kids really need a chance to think about what they want to say before they're going to actually say it. They need an opportunity to think a little. And so she was like, we're going to read a little first, then we're going to think a little, then we're going to chat a little or talk a little, and then they're going to write. And that became a poster that now hangs in my room. And so read a little, think a little, chat a little, talk a little, write a little is sort of like this structure that we use pretty consistently for any piece of text that we're looking at. And I just find that as the educator, I need the time to give my students time to think before we jump into even that conversation. Because we talk so much about academic discourse and conversation is so important, but we also have to have something to say. And so this read a little, think a little time builds time for me to sort of chat with students who may need a pre-chat before they chat with their partner, and also to give students a chance to think about what they want to say. And so like honoring that time of formulating your ideas and your thinking, and that takes time. It doesn't just apparate, like the thought that you want to share isn't immediately there. And then that transfers into the conversations they have with their partners or their teams. And then hopefully, obviously the end goal is for that to transfer into their writing and take what they've said and what they've talked about and put it in their writing. And it seems, I don't know, is it too simple? Is it too easy? But it's sort of like that moment as an educator where it's like, if I don't have that poster in my room, I'm like, here's what we read, here's the question, talk about it. Because that's just sort of the flow of the classroom. But that poster is a reminder to me that I need to honor that they need time to think a little before they chat a little, and they need to chat before they can write.
That's great. And you mentioned like they're doing this probably in partners or maybe with a small group, I'm guessing of like four. And
Yeah.
how long are they talking in this? Like, how long do you give them to talk?
Sure. I've heard variable times for chatting. I think to me it sort of depends on the lull of the room. I was with a bunch of teachers even just last night, and somebody was saying like no more than 40 seconds, and then they're coming back, and I was like, "Whoa, that has to be like the fastest second grade conversation that I've ever seen," and that's incredible if you can do that. But like sometimes it takes a little bit of time to like get your thoughts together. So if you are putting in the think first and then you have a big chunk to say, I don't want to cut you off and I don't want to stop if you what you've said inspired somebody else to say something. I don't want to cut them off. So it is partially reading the room and then also like the students that I'm working with. And as a facilitator of that lesson, I'm around listening to all of these conversations. So it could last anywhere from, I guess, 40 seconds, but hopefully up to a minute or two of discussion for a duo or a team to have that conversation.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, can you give us an example of like what kinds of questions they might be thinking about? Maybe something from your classroom if you can think of it off the top of your head.
Yeah. So right now we're thinking about um, tugboats. So tugboats are high on my mind. My kindergartners are looking at the way that tugboats move through water and they are pushing and pulling. And so the big question that we're wondering is how do tugboats help other things move through the water? But they might be looking at particular ships and whether if it's a cargo ship, are they pushing or are they pulling? And I want students to recognize like that there are different pieces to the tugboat. So like there's ropes, there's hooks, there's all these different things without me saying, let's go and look at this picture and photograph and really look at deeply the picture here. I want them to do that in their academic discussions because I want to see what they know and what they notice. So it might be something as simple as how is that tugboat moving the cargo ship? And then really asking them to look at the piece of text, which in this case is a photograph, right? Like we're thinking about the kindergarten level of access of of text or written structure is really photography at this point, or pictures. So they're looking at that picture and then discussing with their teammates, like, I see a big ship, and that's a cruise ship, and I went on a cruise once. And then there's all this dialogue happening there. And then somebody else will say, like, I noticed a big rope, and then there's some somebody said the other day wagon wheels, and I was like, tires, but not a wagon wheel. But thinking of like the way things move. And so then somebody was like, I think they have wagon wheels or tires because they're rubber, and then they can help them. And so we had this like sort of adjacent discussion because of the academic discourse that was happening in their small groups, sort of reframing and renaming. Like, you're making a connection to when we talked about wagon wheels in our last books, and now we're looking at tires that are on a tugboat. So it can be something that simple, but that given a little bit of time to think before they pair and share, I think can be a huge transition into what they actually talk to their partners about.
That is, first, can I just say tugboats? Like, how cool is that of a topic to talk about and learn about? I don't think I know that much about tugboats. I kind of want to sit in and learn too. But a couple of things just stuck out to me there. Like you mentioned, you're doing this with kindergartners. So you're getting academic discourse with kindergartners who like just started school a few months ago. That's amazing. You're doing it with things that were like, you know, they might not be reading yet, but they still have a text, and that text is a picture, and they're still doing this academic discourse grounded in a text, which is super cool. And just to remind everybody, you're teaching science, right? So you're even doing this outside of an ELA classroom. You're doing it in a content area. So just wanted to point out all those really cool things you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's so important. Having come from a literacy background and jumping into STEM this year has been a little bit of like, it can't just be the job of a homeroom teacher. It has to be not on all of us, but with all of us kind of working together. And so I think about making sure that they have access to rich science texts, and then that opportunity for that really strong academic discourse to be a part of the lab as well. And a lot of them will tell me like, this doesn't feel like science. I'm like, okay, well, what does it feel like? And they're like, it feels like art. I'm like, oh, I love that. I love it. It feels like library. It feels like we're in reading class. It feels like math. And I'm like, science should feel like all of those things, right? Like, you should feel really good about all of the things that we're doing that make that STEM or STEAM family. Yeah.
That's great. I have one last question for you about this particular routine that you use. I know sometimes I would have my students, you know, some students would jump right in and have these great discussions, and they'd be like, yeah, I have so much to say. And then you'd have some students who kind of are just like, they give their one word answer because your teacher said that you have to, and then they don't have much more to say. Do you have any tips for teachers of like how to get some of those students saying more in these types of discussions?
I mean, I think our old friend, sentence stems cannot be underutilized in sort of giving students that language to start. Even as I'm saying, like, this is what we read about, here's the question. I want you to think a little before we chat a little. And they, at this point, they know that routine. And I said, you might be thinking, like, I think the tugboat is connected by something. So the tugboat is connected by, and then some of them will yell at me like rope. And I'm like, nope, that's in your brain. You're thinking about what you want to say when you meet with your partner. But I know for a lot of my multilingual learners, that's a huge piece of the opportunity to engage, is like they've gotten that sentence stem just from me when they're thinking about it, and then they can have that opportunity to practice. And then I'm not afraid to partner with a group. So if I know that there are students that I want to hear from, and there are students that are striving to have their voice be heard, I'm a third member of that team or a fourth member of that team, and I'm going to come over and I want to listen and hear what they have to say. Because I think the other part of academic discourse for all types, whether we're talking about this particular protocol or just having a conversation as a group, is creating that safe space where you can try out academic language that you may make a mistake on. So that sort of comes into the whole way that I run my room around tell me I'm still cool. So whenever I make a mistake, I'm always like, tell me I'm still cool. And then I have a chorus of 22nd graders who are like, you're still cool, or like a bunch of kindergartners who are like, you're still cool. And so I do the same thing in academic discourse. If they're striving to put that sentence together, I'll say, oh, you're still cool, but you want to start with this whole beginning of your sentence. And they're like, I'm still cool. And then they'll start their thought over again. And so it's sort of creating that opportunity to fail forward, have that opportunity to try out something and not have it work, and know that that's just as good as trying out something and it coming out exactly how you wanted it to the first time.
Yeah, this idea of feeling really safe in the academic conversation space is so important, and so I'm so glad that you brought that up, and you have another like really just small strategy that teachers can take and use right away. I love that. You are still cool. You're so cool, actually.
Yes. Thanks.
You're welcome. But this strategy that you shared, the read a little or learn a little, right? Think a little, talk a little, write a little. It's so replicable, and it's a really easy way to get students to talk in the classroom. And I think that that's like on a smaller scale, maybe like an everyday kind of routine you can implement. But I also know that with academic conversations, we want to address like some bigger ways to address conversations. So I'm thinking about things like Socratic seminar or some fishbowl discussions. I'm wondering if you might be able to tell us about these routines and what happens during each of them.
Or I think I was sort of blown away many years ago during my very first Socratic seminar. I sort of touted as the change in me, like 10 years ago, as a teacher who sort of realized I had to get out of my own way. And I had been lowering the bar so that students felt successful. And my very first Socratic seminar was the moment that I was like, oh, everybody is so capable, and I need to like keep that level of academic rigor at high, because they will totally meet me there. And I always thank the most adorable second grader named Dylan, who I wish I could just like take with me now, although I'm sure he's like in 8th or 9th grade at this point, who was a student who was not in our room full time. He had a lot of academic pullout support, but he was in our first Socratic seminar, and we couldn't stop him from talking. Like, he was just a chatterbox through Socratic seminar. And I was sort of like, his peers were able to see him as having this strong voice and value. And so I was like, gosh, I need to make sure that Socratic seminars become like a salient part of what I do as an educator. And so they are, those student-led discussions with no teacher voice. They are run through a lot of practice. So it's not like we just like all sit in a circle and everybody has their hands in their lap and we're all ready to go. But it's definitely that opportunity for me to step back and listen to students who have a strong voice, students who maybe are a little bit quieter. When I started way back in the day, I was using tokens to talk. And so I would give everybody their 3 tokens. It was actually a fellow who used pennies to do their Socratic seminar, which just becomes like that thing that I'm like, please, for the rest of my life, ever give them 2 pennies so that they can put in their 2 cents, which I think is such a brilliant idea in small group. Sometimes that works really well in second grade, and sometimes there's just pennies everywhere. But we do a lot with showing them that their idea is worth something, right? So when you're putting it in here, I want you to share your token or your idea. And then that there's no sort of like, that's so correct, right? Because I think sometimes in discussions, we're, as educators especially, we're looking to guide them somewhere. There's like sort of this answer that we know in our minds we would like to get to. And the reality is like the best discussions don't necessarily have like this one thing that will be the answer at the end of the discussion, but rather it's the actual discussion itself that is the real gift. And so I think I've been running them for literacy for so long that stepping into the science lab, I was sort of like, I need them to be a part of science so that kids can argue like if we should build a pergola or a shade over our playground so the sun doesn't get to us, and they can have this like really rich discussion around pergolas are made out of wood and a shade has vinyl or plastic. And so I'm hearing like all this vocabulary coming from them and what they do or do not understand. Some kids were like, you can't build a pergola because it's like you need nails and a hammer. And I was like, well, at least you know what a pergola is, but we could build a pergola here. So we have those opportunities for that really rich discussion. Something that people will come in and sort of be like, I can't believe you have kindergartners having this kind of conversation. And I still laugh because it took me 9 years to do this. And I did it for the first time last year. And it becomes the thing that I'm like, why didn't I do this 9 years ago? But I had a group that was very like policing each other during Socratic seminar and like it's my turn to share. You have to wait for me, or I'm going to share first. And then they also wanted to go in order. And I was like, y'all, we have to like work as a team to be able to have this conversation. And so I just found a fellow educator, actually a Maryland educator, who was doing inside outside circles. And I shared it. They were eighth graders, shared it with my second graders. And they were just like, oh, wait, that's what Socratic Seminar is? And I was like,
So you actually
yes.
showed them a video?
Like a model.
Yes,
That's
I showed
awesome.
them a video. Isn't that like the most simple thing ever in the history of mankind life? But I was just like, yes. And they were like, oh, we can do that. Yeah, now that that's what you want, like we can do that. And I was like, why? Why wouldn't I like model in some way?
Well, because I think you can't model that with
Oh, right. Well, you
Right,
can't model it on your
yourself.
own.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Like I was like, as an adult teacher, I can't like bring in a bunch of other teachers because they're going to be like, you can do that because you're a teacher. So to see other kids do it, they were just like, oh, okay. So then that was like the end of bickering, the end of arguing. They were like, we want to be like those eighth graders. Like we're going to do
Ooh.
that. So now I start the beginning of every Socratic Seminar season with here's where we're going. We won't be here on the first Socratic Seminar, but this is what we really want. We want to listen to each other. We want to hear what the other people are saying, and we want to add on to people's thinking. We want to make those links, those connections for each of our classmates. And so I think that has been such a game changer for myself in doing it. And then that all kind of comes into like the grace of it all. Like I think when you're trying anything new, and this particular thing for me 9 years ago was completely brand new, that it's not going to be like this perfect, beautiful conversation that you could like film and showcase with everybody. Like they are a little bit messy the first couple of times you do them. And that's like the beauty of academic discourse is it grows over time. It gets better and better. I think one of the things that I hear a lot for my multilingual learners too, like people will tell me in Socratic Seminar, the kids are just repeating each other. And I'm like, yeah, but in English. So like, that's incredible. I'm so happy that they are restating what their peers are saying in the English language. I mean, the school that I teach at is so diverse. We are so lucky. We're more than 50% diverse. We have students from all over the world, Bulgaria, Central and South America. And they all come to this like one little island school, which is so exciting. But we have languages that represent those cultures as well. And so making sure that they have opportunity to hear spoken language in English and then also to try it out. So copying or mirroring or mimicking, those are all steps in the process of learning the English language and certainly how to use English language in academic discourse. Yeah.
Okay, there's so much I want to follow up on, Jamie, but I think number one, I would like to just stay on the Socratic Seminar for a moment and think about the preparation that goes into it. Can you describe some preparation? Because I know your students still just don't show up on Tuesday and you're like, here's the question, let's Socratic Seminar. So can you maybe walk us through what that preparation looks like and just speak to your multilingual learner population again? I think that's so helpful, at least for me to hear. I love hearing, the support that you're giving your students all around, but also for that specific population. I think in the way that we're talking about academic conversation, it really makes a lot of sense to hear how we're supporting students.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the big things is it has to be done with this sort of like the end goal in mind. So this universal design is purposeful in that we understand backwards planning, right? So I don't want to arrive at Socratic Seminar and then hope they have enough to talk about, but I need to know that along the way we've picked up some information so that they're coming to Socratic Seminar with something that's going to be really successful. And I hope that I'm doing read a little, think a little, chat a little, write a little before they come to Socratic Seminar. So they are doing some sort of drawing or picture creation to have something that they want to share, show, or say in Socratic Seminar. But even well before that point of the day of Socratic Seminar, I've have to think out kind of like weeks in advance for what students are picking up along the way, because I don't anticipate that a kindergartner is going to come to their first Socratic Seminar and just know pergola and shade and umbrella without some sort of lessons that have introduced those along the way so that students can feel really successful. So in that way, it's sort of like planning with that destination in mind, and one of the stops along the way we know is going to be Socratic Seminar. And so where do I need to stop along the way to support them? I often tell this like really funny story in my own life that has less to do with Socratic Seminar, but more to do with backwards planning. And I lived in a city very recently where my mother used to just drive from her house towards my house and like did not have the destination in the GPS. And then she would tell me like, okay, I'm by a brick building and there's a woman in a pink shirt. Like, do you know where I am in the city? And I was like, no. And I was like, and mom, like no one gets in their car and just drives in the direction that they're heading because
hilarious.
you're going to get lost and I'm not going to be able to find you. And I feel like that about the end of like the culminating experience for Socratic seminars. Like you can't just get in on that day and be like, here, you have this great conversation. It's just not going to happen. But if along the way I've given them tips and tricks and directions and they kind of know where we're going and the vocabulary is built in, and then we've had discussions about things that are very similar, and then they get to this ending point where they can have this culminating experience, it makes for a much richer and deeper Socratic seminar, because the other 50% of Socratic seminar is just a really good question, right? So I can ask a question like, do you like chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream? And you can have a discussion about it, but there's not going to be depth there. So when I'm thinking about the creation of a really good question, it has to be something that I know there can be really deep discourse about. And that has to be in the backwards design as well.
Yeah, connected to what they're learning about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so thinking about Socratic seminar is like the big picture. It's going to be built in over time. I'm going to maybe even scaffold my questions leading up to that bigger question, right? That then they're coming and they're ready. I'm just picturing like very practically, I'm picturing students coming with their notebooks, having their vocabulary, having their pictures drawn, having anything like glued in that they might want to refer to or point to, and they are not surprised. Like they know the question, right, that they're going to be answering. This is not a surprise to them, right? I see you nodding your head. So if you're listening, Jamie's nodding her head. Yes, there's no surprises here. We're preparing our kids well. So and all students participate in this, Jamie. I hear you saying that they might have a coin. They're going to participate. They know their value add, their roles, and they see where this all fits into the big picture.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if we can kind of flip, because I mentioned fishbowl earlier. And if any teachers who are still listening are thinking, okay, so what's the difference between a fishbowl and a Socratic seminar?
And you mentioned that video was Inside Out, which I think is similar.
Yeah,
to
I did write that down too, Melissa. I was like, and we said it's something else. So, so Jamie, we're going to turn it to you. Can you clarify for us, maybe like what is a fishbowl? And Melissa, is that a synonym for? I would use it as a synonym.
I'll ask Jamie though.
Okay, yeah.
I've been using it as a synonym.
Okay, same.
Good.
I wasn't sure. Okay.
Yeah, because to me, a fishbowl is like there's a group that's having their discussion on the inside, and then there's a group that's sitting on the outside, or a circle, inside outside circles.
Sure. Inside, outside, outside, inside. Are you singing the song from Recess? Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
No.
Oh my gosh.
No.
You didn't grow up in South Jersey. Okay. Carry on.
Amazing. So I think one of the things that is really, I'll hear from even colleagues that will say, I'm scared to try a Socratic seminar because it feels like a huge group. Then I feel like fishbowl or inside outside circles is a nice place to start, right? Because it's half of your class is having that discussion on the inside, the other half is able to listen on the outside, and then they switch and they have an opportunity to come to the inside circle and be an observer on the outside. But I think for some teachers who are maybe feeling that anxiety of I'm not really sure how this is going to go, starting with inside outside can be a real opportunity to help guide the learning. It's still a student-led discussion. So for my perspective, if I'm doing inside outside, I'm not a voice that's in that conversation. I'm just an observer both times. And I think picking of the groups and the way that you create those inside outside circles is sort of like every teacher is a little bit magic, and it's sort of like that's part of the magic of teaching is like knowing like I'm going to need some multilingual learners in each of my groups. I'm going to need students who are striving readers in each of my groups, and really building out an opportunity to have kind of a diverse team that's having that conversation, and then switching can be really powerful. Something that again always feels like more obvious to me than it did like the moment before it happened is sort of that outside circle really valuing being able to hear what their peers have to say, because you just listen in a different way when you don't have to talk, right? When you can actually really listen, because if you're on that inside circle, you're listening while processing to get your answer together. And if you're a multilingual learner, that's a lot. So you have to be hearing what people are saying and be processing for the next idea. Whereas if you're sitting on the outside and you're a multilingual learner, what a real gift it is to be like, I'm just processing what people are saying. And then when it's my turn to go in, I can practice with my language.
Such a good point. Jamie, I'm wondering if you can give us any tips or any thoughts on the engagement for that outside circle. Like, how does it not become unwieldy?
That's a really good question. And like, I think it's okay if sometimes it does, right? Like, so that goes back a little bit to like, you're still cool and we're still figuring it out. I read this incredible book this fall. It just came out. And if you don't have a copy of it, I want you to pick up a copy. It's called Failabration. And it's all about like celebrating your failures. And it has radically changed when we make mistakes. So like, I might say to my outside circle team, like, we're going to have a little bit of a failabration when we're done here, friends, because it's a little too noisy on the outside and we need to be listening. And we just send each other like, you know, positive energy or a woo after it for our failabration. But it's really been like this tactile thing that I've used fairly successfully this year to sort of be like, that wasn't exactly what I was looking for. You're still cool. And we're not going to be like upset about it or never have a Socratic seminar ever again. But just like, that we can do better, right? And sort of what that's going to look like. I also think like one of the things that I've leveraged is like, I'm not going to ask you to participate in that conversation, but I am going to ask to hear from, you know, like an equity stick pull, one or two of the outside circle friends, but what they heard before we switch to inside outside. So they don't know who's going to get pulled and they don't really know what I'm going to exactly be asking them about what they heard. I mean, typically it's sort of like, can you not summarize, but can you tell me a little bit about what you heard this student say? Or can you tell me a little bit about what this student said? Or did you hear anybody that agreed? Who agreed with each other? Who disagreed with each other? And so they have to be listening in case their equity stick is pulled. But again, I think as educators, we have to like lean into like it being a little bit of a messy thing when you first get started. And the more you can do to create those routines that are sort of like, I just grab my can of equity sticks and they all know like, oh, she's going to pull one. At the end of this, we gotta be ready to like have something in our mind and be ready to have that conversation with her. I think is a huge factor. I've also done it where like I want them not in this outside circle because I think that can be really distracting, but it's sort of like right when the inside circle is done, I want the outside circle to go add something to their drawing or write something that they heard that was said so that they know they have an actionable purpose before they switch into the inside circle. And again, it might be something as simple as like they're just checking off that they did the same thing or they heard the same thing that they wrote on their paper, but it's that action of like there is something to be done and not just like this passiveness of sitting and listening.
Yeah.
Does that
Such good points. That does make so much sense. Yeah. I asked that because I didn't really try this went till I taught fifth grade. And it was, I remember with the students, fishbowl or inside out, whatever we want to call it, with the students who were like amped up to talk, they were in it to win it. But the other students were sometimes a little bit hesitant. And so sometimes I remember using like a little checklist for them, or like I had a student come who didn't speak any English at all. And I remember having just like a checklist for him of like talking, not talking, and then like maybe just like a little question, and like he could participate in different ways, like touching vocabulary that we were working with in addition to these like executive functioning things that were happening in front. So I love that idea just of even an equity stick or going to add something to a drawing or a diagram, something to create involvement and engagement that's kind of low pressure, but also does set the stakes of, hey, we're all still participating. We're all still learning here. And it wasn't your time to be like super active in the middle of the circle, but you're still responsible for learning during this time. I love it.
It's still not an I gotcha or an aha. Like,
correct.
Like I want you to feel really successful. So it's never going to be like when you go to add it to your paper that like, oh, you didn't have anything to write. Like I want you to have something to add to your paper, but I feel like I have to move away from like, you're not getting penalized because you didn't have something to add. It's really about adding to your own thinking.
Yeah,
it's you versus you.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that I thought the hardest part of doing a Socratic seminar in my classroom was really getting them to listen to each other and not just like putting their pennies in and saying they were done, but really listening. And all these things you're talking about, plus the like having a really good question that you mentioned earlier. But all of these, like, there's a reason for listening. That's why we're doing this. It's not just about you saying something, right? But it is a whole conversation. So you're learning from each other as well. So I think that you've given some really good tips for that as well. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
So.
And there's so much value to me in both protocols, if you will, right? Like both speaking protocols, either the Socratic seminar or the Fishbowl / Inside Out. I know though there are probably more, but these are the two we're just focusing on today. And I think it's really helpful to think, what does my class need right now? What would be a stepping stone to get to an end goal that I have, for them? And I love thinking about how to use these two protocols specifically to kind of scaffold where we are, or where educators listening are, and how to get my students, to where we want them to be in terms of learning all of the content that they need to learn.
Yeah. All right. So to wrap up, Jamie, it's pretty obvious that you really value academic talk in your classroom from everything that you've mentioned, but I'm wondering if you want to just share a little bit about why is it so important to you to have this academic talk and for your students to be talking in your classroom?
Sure. I mean, I think, and I always hold this story and value it so much because it's sort of the reason I became an educator as well. And that is that I'm a multilingual learner. So I was adopted from South America when I was 3 years old, and I came to this country not speaking any English. And I grew up really wanting to be the best I could ever be as a kid. Now as an adult, I get a little verklempt about it because it is that moment as an educator where I wish that I had access to academic discourse when I was growing up. I went to school when we were quiet and you sat and you listened, and that's what you were to do. And I think as a little kid, I was always worried about getting sent back. And my adoptive family was always like, "You were never going to send you back. What, are you out of your mind?" And I was like, "I know." And I couldn't tell you as a little kid that I was feeling those feels. But I wanted to, and there just wasn't room for academic discourse at that time. And I think if there was, I would have had a lot to say, but I was sort of working really hard to just kind of hold it all in. And it's why I didn't really weed out of multilingual learning support until I was in 6th grade. And I meet educators now who are what? How did that happen? And I was because I wasn't talking, right? I wasn't really given the space to be able to do that. And so it matters to me so much that my kiddos don't have that feeling that their voice is so important and it matters so much. And they matter, but also the opportunity to try out their English and their skills is so important. I will never know, none of us will, what the backpacks are that walk into my room every day and what they're filled with. And so whether it's through adoption or through moving to this country as a new person, I want them to know that this space is an opportunity to have deep conversations, critical learning is happening, and that academic discourse is so important, even when it's messy and even when it's a little bit loud and boisterous, that's okay. And I think there's a little bit of the little Jamie, the little me that's if someone had given me the opportunity to be in a Socratic seminar when I was in 2nd grade, I feel maybe my trajectory in education would have been a little bit different because I was always the kid that felt I was trying to keep up, and I wanted to be good enough to keep up with everybody else. And I would go back in time and sort of be no, you are. You totally are. And you should be having conversations. So I make it a huge part of I think my classroom because I know for so many of my learners, it's important for them. Sorry.
No, you're so inspiring. I just want to tell you that you're still cool.
Thanks.
Really, though, you're just amazing, Jamie. And we're so lucky to have talked with you. And I can't thank you enough. I know Melissa can't either, for being here today and for sharing everything that happens in your classroom and for sharing that story that helps us really understand why this is so important to you.
Thanks.